I wasn't telling everybody, hey, I'm writing a book, because I didn't want to jinx it or, just brag about this thing that might not actually happen. And so I had this one friend who knew I was doing it, and he said, like, you have to give me some kind of indication of what it's about, because I wouldn't tell him. And finally I said, what if it was like if Tarkovsky directed Back to the Future? And he was like, oh, okay, I can work with that.
Well, hi, and welcome to the PBS Books Readers Club.
Today, we'll be joined by Scott Alexander Howard, author of this month's pick, The Other Valley.
The New York Times calls this book a slow-boiling philosophical thriller, covering concepts like grief, love, and fate versus free will, and that's so true.
If you haven't read it yet, don't worry, there are no spoilers. True. And this conversation will just enhance your reading experience.
Hi, I'm Fred Nahat here with Lauren Smith. Heather Marie Montilla is our resident librarian, national director of PBS Books, and award-winning video essayist Princess Weeks brings her master's degree in literary theory to our table to help us make sense of all of this.
And boy, do I try.
We're really
with this one, I really felt like I needed to use all of that education. It was really rich.
We are grateful.
But of course, you are the most important member of this book club, so please share all your thoughts in the comments. We hope you'll join the PBS Books Readers Club Facebook group to find and share book recommendations and discuss your favorite reads. And speaking of favorite reads, I really enjoyed The Other Valley. It was one of those page turners, a thriller for sure, but not in like a spooky horror way. Just I want to know what happens next. What did you think?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really rich. It's about this teenage girl named Odile. She lives in this small town with these heavily guarded borders between these two villages where you can go 20 years into the past or 20 years into the future. And she gets a possibility to be one of the people who helps decide who gets to go one way or the other. And it's just such an interesting dilemma of what you would do with that kind of power, but also does it behoove you really to know that much about the past or the future?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really love the book too. For me, it was a lot about interfamilial relationships. It was about a mother and child and expectations. It was about really parents' choices and rules they lay out and how that rule or those situations can impact so very much and everyone around them too, and just how it snowballs and affects others in their realm.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And those clever writers at the Times, a philosophical thriller. I love that. That's exactly what it is. And you talk about dystopia. Say one thing for dystopia. It really puts some framing around what's actually important in the sense of human joy. It was really great.
I thought it was really interesting too, like just the idea of living in such a controlled society. These borders between the future and the past were very heavily guarded. And it's interesting to think about, like, what are those controls in our world? Right. You know, what is making us act the way that we do? And I also thought it was interesting, like, there was very specific reasons why you would be allowed to cross into the future or into the past. And one of those reasons was grief, in order to, like, see someone that you've lost or to find out what's going to happen to your family if you know for some reason you're not going to make it, 20 years in the future. Like, for that to be the only reason why you could cross into the future, it just made it so interesting, like these ideas of grief. And of course, it makes you ask, like, if given the choice, would you cross into the future? Would you cross into the past? Would you want to know?
Yeah. No, I feel like I'm nosy. I want to know. I feel like I would love to get advice from my future self, or like words of comfort, because I feel like there's so much anxiety, especially now, about the future. I don't know if my past self would take my advice.
Pointless to go back.
So let's just move forward. Like, I love my present and I love where I've gotten to, but I think I would be tempted to see where I would go.
I also thought as I was reading this about memory and who are the people in my past who maybe have passed away who I would want to visit and just observe and see them one last time. And that isn't really something I have really ever considered before as an adult, at least. Yeah. So that was, really deep as I was reading. I definitely think this book, you wrestle with questions of memory, questions of the future, what your future holds. And that makes it fun, but also challenging.
Yeah, I think I would just ruin it for myself. Either like if I tried to go to the future and find out what was going to happen, then my present self would try to fix it and probably make it worse. And if I went to the past and tried to give myself advice, I think I would I would ruin it. I'd make it worse.
Well, that
I'm going to
sounds
stay put.
That sounds right. I'm holding. I wouldn't want to know. I love my life. I'm playing with the house's money. I want to see that game play out in real time and figure out what the final score is. Well, lots to discuss with Scott Alexander Howard. He'll be joining us in just a moment. But first, we want to invite you to join the PBS Books Readers Club Facebook group.
And be sure to follow PBS Books on Facebook and Instagram too, so you can fill your feed with great books and authors.
And if you find yourself really appreciating this program, I hope you'll take a moment right now to show your support. PBS stations rely on donations from folks like you and me, and if you'd like to see more of the PBS Books Readers Club, please consider making a donation to help keep the whole thing going.
Yeah, do that right now. Visit pbsbooks.org/donate. You'll be taken to your local PBS station's giving webpage where you can find some awesome PBS Books swag as our thanks for supporting this program. One of those gifts is an ebook download of The Other Valley or any of our PBS Books features for your phone, tablet, or e-reader. After you make your donation, you'll receive an email with a link and a special code to download one of our featured books. Plus, we'll send you a set of the official PBS Books Readers Club stickers.
Those stickers are a really fun way to show off your love of reading and your support for PBS. They're heavy-duty, removable stickers that you can put on your phone, your laptop, water bottle, car, truck, wherever you like.
Notebook.
Get yours when you visit pbsbooks.org/donate.
Donations support your local PBS station, and they let us know that you'd like to see more of the PBS Books Readers Club. Plus, as a PBS member, you'll also enjoy access to PBS Passport, the members-only section on the PBS app where you can stream full seasons of your favorite PBS shows, including our watch-alike for this month, A Brief History of the Future. It's a really interesting documentary series about our futures and how we might reimagine them. If you loved reading The Other Valley, I think this show will be right up your alley.
Well, it's now time to bring in the author of today's feature, The Other Valley, Scott Alexander Howard. Welcome to the PBS Books Readers Club.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, after reading The Other Valley, it really made a lot of sense to find out that you have a PhD in philosophy and that as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard, you focused your work on the relationship between memory, emotion, and literature, all of which seems to have bubbled up into this amazing novel. Tell us how this all came to be.
Bubble up is a pretty good term for it, I think. It's kind of threaded throughout. I wouldn't say that the book is kind of like a fictional version of my work in philosophy, but I think that there's kind of a lineage between the two. What I was doing in philosophy was, as you said, kind of studying the relationships between memory and literature and emotion. And specifically in philosophy, I was dealing with kind of emotions that are targeted at the passage of time. So kind of these feelings of poignancy that we have about the transience of life. These kind of big existential feelings that we kind of think of as poetic emotions. And the philosophical project was kind of focused on ways in which we sometimes don't trust those emotions or find them corny, and whether that corniness can be justified, how we talk about the evaluation of such emotions. And then once I was working on the novel, I think that a lot of those same feelings kind of came up and they became almost a literal part of the landscape. The book is about a world where the past and the future exist as, they go on existing as physical places that are always just kind of just out of reach across the mountains and across this border. And I feel like that sense of poignancy is really kind of present in the novel for that reason. It's there, but it's unreachable.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, for sure.
This is your debut novel. And obviously you started to give us a little bit of background already, but how long has the idea for this book been brewing? And when did you know your idea was going to actually be a book? And how long did it take to write?
Well, I really like how you broke down that into 3 questions because it is separate. Everybody will be like, oh, how long did it take to write? And I'm like, well, it depends on whether you count it from, the very first idea or, when you actually started working on the idea. So for me, the idea I first had, I think this is the 10-year anniversary of that idea coming to mind. And I didn't do anything with it for maybe, thank you. Me and my idea. I think that maybe I started working on it like 6 years later, 5 or 6 years later. It took a long time to actually get around to it because I was still an academic at the time when I had this thought. And that's kind of an all-consuming lifestyle. Like, you're always working and hustling and trying to get a new job, and there's not a lot of time for creative pursuits, at least for me, with the teaching too. So when I finally started to work on the book, I would say that it took me maybe 3 full years of writing to actually finish it. And then with publishing, everything takes forever. So it's kind of been finished for 2 years. And so that's how long I've known it would actually be a book.
That's so exciting. As an English major, the first thing that really excited me was that the main character's name was Odile, which automatically made me think of Black Swan. And we see different music and musicians as a part of the story. So I just wanted to ask, what kind of other art and music kind of inspired the world building and just the way you crafted this narrative?
You're the first person to make out that Black Swan reference. Thank you.
Academic.
That's why she's here.
Yep, master's in literary theory. You're welcome.
It was a name that I came to partly just because I liked the name. I liked that it was sort of pretty in French and maybe a little bit more like awkward in English. And I wanted her to be kind of to sort of ride the line between those things. But I think that then when I was looking into, okay, can I use this name? Or is it too taken? I was like, oh yeah, Black Swan. Okay. Swan Lake really works for this. So that was kind of a nice permission to go forth. I think that a lot of other art forms did inform the book. I think I thought about it in terms of film a lot. For some reason, I've watched a lot more time travel fare like on the screen than I have read time travel books. And so I was thinking about, certain films when I was writing this. I remember early on, I had a friend I kept it pretty close to the vest. I wasn't telling everybody, hey, I'm writing a book, because I didn't want to jinx it or, just brag about this thing that might not actually happen. And so I had this one friend who knew I was doing it, and he said, you have to give me some kind of indication of what it's about, because I wouldn't tell him. And finally I said, what if it was if Tarkovsky directed Back to the Future? And he was like, oh, okay, I can work with that. So I think that really directorial kind of have always been part of it for me.
Well, that kind of centers me, the Back to the Future reference, because of course they go in the future and they find the sports book. But getting into the plot a little bit, in addition to the approved visits, the concept of coordination or breaching the border to sort of engineer a future outcome, that is a major plot point. If you travel into the future, if you breach the border, if you coordinate, it seemed like it was mostly aimed at preventing pain or easing pain. And the joy isn't found in using future access to engineer wealth or fortune. It was more about easing my pain, and that's where the joy is found.
Yes. Yeah, I think that their world is structured around trying to it's in a way all about harm reduction and risk management. The world exists in such a way that merely kind of walking to the east or the west could have dire consequences for either themselves or for their neighboring town, which is another version of themselves. And so they have to be extremely kind of careful about the way in which they do this, and whether they do this at all. And so I'm not sure that there's joy found in it so much as there's just kind of comfort and safety found in it. I feel like that's kind of where the society is at.
So in the book, the borders between the past and future are very heavily guarded for all the reasons you just noted. I thought it was so interesting that the only real exception it seemed to be given to people to cross over the border was sort of as a balm for grief, either to look in on the past at a family member who had died, or maybe have a glimpse of the future of a family member that you won't survive to see. I thought it was really interesting that in the world that you created, the only exception to crossover was grief. Talk to us a little bit about this theme of grief and how that played into it for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of an eccentric view of time travel, I suppose. Usually the trope is used for kind of, changing the past in these grander ways. And in this case, I think that it stems from the circumstances in which the idea first came to me. So, 10 years ago, I had a good friend who passed away. She was in hospice, and a few days before she died, I had this sudden image of these towns that just repeated over and over again, all staggered in time at these precise intervals. And I kind of just thought, that's a cool idea. I should do something with that someday, or maybe somebody else should, and didn't really think about it for a long time. But the reason that grief has always been the main impetus for time travel in this story kind of stems from that personal context. I was in a situation where I was trying to help coordinate whether, all of her friends could see her again, because things were moving more quickly than we'd expected them to. And we didn't end up getting to, most of us didn't end up getting to say goodbye to her in the way that we would have liked. And we had to sort of reconcile ourselves to the fact that the last time we saw her, this kind of incidental, just hi, goodbye, was the last time. And so I think that this world being structured around people kind of getting to see a final, have a final vision of a loved one and say a final goodbye, even if at a distance, I think that's the reason why.
While grief and tragedy play a huge theme in this book, I was really struck by the theme of parent expectations, both in career choices and selected interests. Now, it might be that I'm a parent of a nice little group of kids. Can you discuss this and why it was important to include this in the book?
It's kind of happened out that way. It wasn't really something that was intentionally planned. It's just that as I wrote, I found myself liking that source of pressure in the book. So I don't think that there's kind of a, I wasn't trying to engineer a message about that so much as I was just kind of finding that that's where the interest lay when I was writing the book. And that's writing fiction, is sometimes you don't really know, where the juice is coming from, but you're like, well, I know that this material has the juice, so I have to kind of follow that.
Absolutely. Going back to structure, because I'm so curious about the styles that you chose. Like I felt like I was like reading Mrs. Dalloway again, like this way, like the kind of sentences were all coming together and the way you use punctuation. So I just wanted to ask a little bit more about that part of structuring. What made you decide to write it that way, and how you felt the messages came across stronger of what you wanted to say through that method of storytelling?
Well, thank you for the wolf comparison. That's wonderful. One of my faves. I think that actually a lot of the stuff in my dissertation was drawn from To the Lighthouse and the Waves. So it's nice that there's some kind of.
Awesome.
I think that the style. I mean, I feel like what you're getting at there is maybe partly about the quotation marks. And so, this is a novel where, like a lot of literary fiction, there's quotation marks aren't used to demarcate dialogue. So dialogue just kind of appears as part of the sort of same voice as the rest of the narrative structure. And I think that the reason why that felt right in this book was that I wanted it to be this is a first person narrative. It's by Odile. She's the one telling this story. It's her story. And I wanted it to be all very obviously in her voice, so that even when she was, ostensibly quoting other people's words, it still looked to the reader like it's coming in Odile's voice, the way that her voice always comes to us. So I kind of wanted her voice to have this totalizing kind of feeling to it, where you're never really free of this mind. And I know that there's some people online this is kind of a bugbear for them, but I feel like give it a chance. It's not that hard to follow dialogue without quotation marks. And I also think that even when dialogue is demarcated with quotation marks, it's still, reading is such a cognitively complex thing. We're always having to parse, okay, who's saying what here, quotation marks or not, if you're following along, and what tone is it being said in, and so forth. So I actually don't think it's that big of a stumbling block once you start.
No, I love that idea of like a continuous stream of consciousness. That is very Woolfian. So that was it was a fun exercise to use that part of you, because it was really thrilling.
Well, we spend a lot of time at this table talking about movie versus book, and the answers are generally the imagination. You create the image in your mind. But to me, a lot of the literary flourishes you've included in a movie script would just be stage direction, and they're fantastic. Let me just read a couple. Rip the night into ribbons. A primrose dawn glowed on the glacial foothills, like isolated puddles proving it had rained. And my favorite, the sound of being early. Do these things just come to you? Do you channel them, or do you labor over these because they're fantastic?
Oh, thank you. I think that a lot of those things kind of come out as I revise. So, the first draft will be a little bit more clunky, a little bit more literal. I call it the story draft, where I'm just like, I've got to tell the story almost to myself. So it doesn't even really read like a book yet. It's just like, okay, here's why this character is doing this thing, very baldly stated. And then each time I do another revision through the book, I'll just have these kinds of phrases occurring to me. And for some reason, a lot of the more the stylistic flourishes that you're getting at there, I think, are things that come about more easily on a second pass, a third pass, a fourth pass, just because your mind is freed up from having to just kind of forge this path from nothingness into into existence. You're not doing all the cognitive labor of coming up with the story. Instead, you're just like, okay, well, how do I see this? When I kind of close my eyes and imagine this scene come to my mind.
Well, come for the original story, stay for the poetry.
Yeah, right.
As we've already discussed a bit, the main character in the book is Odile, a young woman who is trying to figure out what she wants to do in life, as am I in many ways still. At the very beginning of the book, Odile wants to join the Conseil, which decides who is allowed to cross the borders into the past or the future. In order to be nominated by her teacher, Pichegru, he asks her to write an essay answering the following question. If you had permission to travel outside the valley, which direction would you go? The past or the future? If you were given the same question, what would be your answer?
I think if I lived in their world, I would want to go to the past. I think I'm a pretty patient person, and I can wait for the future to kind of come naturally, as it were. As long as I can stay alive for the next 20 years, I'll get to see exactly what the valley in the future would look like at the moment when I'm considering this question. Whereas the past, that's the rare opportunity, And I think also maybe kind of temperamentally, I'm sort of a nostalgic person. I'm kind of interested in the past, and I think there's something more fascinating. That kind of comes out, I think, in the book too, where, not to spoil things, but once we actually get a glimpse of the future valley, there's a lot of description there that reveals it to be kind of like a little bit more of a barren place. Whereas when we go to the past, things become a lot more lush, and there's almost this overwhelming sense of memory that sort of assaults the character who's gone there. And so, yeah, I don't know. I find the past a little bit more fascinating than the future.
Well, I found Odile to be a fascinating character too, and she was interesting to follow because she starts out as a bit of an awkward teenager, and then throughout the book we get to follow her into middle age, and she's fascinating because in some ways she's really smart, she's brilliant, and she's brave, but then at also times she makes frustrating decisions, and just her personality is unusual, and it's weird to live inside her mind throughout the whole book. So I'm really interested in how you went about developing her character.
It's ripped from autobiography, I suppose. It's weird being in my mind.
Sorry that I said that you were weird in your mind.
No, not at all. And I'm also
Yeah, we are.
I'm also exaggerating. I mean, I think every kind of narrator is sort of a warped version of the author, and indeed every character ends up being kind of some, the author seen through some other prism. I think that I sort of took aspects of myself and then just kind of maxed them out. So I thought, like, what's an interesting person that I can create from if I take my own shyness and just kind of amplify that, and if I take away some of the irreverence and the sense of humor that I have, and I give that to another character rather than to her. So that's something that you see in Edme and Alon, her friends, in the first half of the book. Those are also parts of myself that I just sort of robbed from Odile, and decided to see how she could do without them. Yeah, I think that the character of Odile came to me after the idea for the book did. So I had this idea of kind of the setting and the time travel conceit. I had a pretty strong sense of what the world would be like, but I didn't have a story to tell within it yet, other than that I knew it had to do with grief in some way. And I remember at the very beginning of the process, just writing these little vignettes to try to work my way into the world. I would just sort of come up with a character and follow just some random person that I'd never thought of before. Let's see how they're going about their day. And I kind of felt like I was like sort of a spy or like a bird watcher in my own world, just like, okay, let's watch this person and that person. And I think it was only a few days into this process when I saw this girl who was standing by herself outside of her school, just by the wall, not talking to anybody. And I kind of wondered, like, why is she doing that? And who is this person? And so she came pretty quickly once I started to try to find her.
I wonder who that person is. She's
Right.
out there somewhere. That's so cool. It's
Out
very
there
interesting.
thinking. One of the things that actually you saying that made me think of this question. What made you decide to have the structure of the book be as a Bildungsroman, as a coming of age story, versus, since you're playing with time travel already, not having it start with her in her 30s and then go back? I would just love to hear like why you decided to tell it in this sort of like linear way and then kind of play with time.
Yeah, I think that the original conception, which didn't last very long, but I did think I was going to have it be more retrospective and start with adulthood. You know, in some ways, I think that maybe was the influence of Never Let Me Go, you know, which is a book that I kind of felt like gave me permission to sort of write this one in some ways. I was like, oh, this is, you can play with genre in this literary way that I hadn't known about before. But I think that didn't last because I really wanted to have the reader feel the absence of childhood. I wanted to kind of get you used to this one thing. And then when she has this tragedy occur and she makes sort of a rash decision that changes the course of her life, and we jump forward to adulthood, I wanted the reader in that second half of the book to really miss childhood in the same way that she misses her childhood, even though she's not quite admitting it to us. And she's sort of disavowing this idea. So it was a bit of it was a conscious decision to sort of inflict a little bit of her pain onto the reader at the start, and then the challenge is to make the second half of the book as interesting as the first, even though I've sort of taken away so many of the things that were operating in the first half. So hopefully I succeeded.
No, for sure. It kind of like the part two, when we jumped to it, it kind of made me feel of what it must be like if like you read To Kill a Mockingbird, you were like Wit Scout, and all of a sudden, you know, she's an adult now and you're dealing with this whole different person who's at the same foundation but just dealing with it differently. It was very interesting seeing how it played out.
One of the things I love about the work, in the world of speculative fiction and fantasy where time and space is unlimited, you've given it this French flavor, which maybe comes from your Canadian roots, but also gives it a hint of a post-apocalyptic world that eerily connects to our world, and in a way left me feeling a bit uneasy. And now we always ask our viewers and followers to share some of their own questions, and Susan Earle seemed to have a similar feeling as me. She says, just started part 2 and find the story so intriguing. The names seem French. Was that to make it seem more foreign?
Yeah, the answer is yes. The answer is absolutely yes. That was the point of the...
There you go, Susan.
Yeah, next question. No, the French thing... Yeah, the French thing I think came about because the reason that it sort of clicked and stayed in this story was that I wanted to. I mean, the entire story is kind of based around hovering between realism and speculative or fantasy sort of fiction. I wanted it to feel always kind of uncomfortably familiar and unfamiliar, you know, that kind of middle ground. And I thought that if I use naming close to home, character's name Scott, for example, it would just not kind of give you that flavor of otherness. If I used conventions that were, you know, more sci-fi fantasy conventions, names that have no kind of precedent in like Earth languages, then it would seem too foreign. So I felt like, oh, the obvious solution here is to use a language that is, you know, foreign to most of the readers of this book, but is still very familiar as a language to all of us.
Worked for me, worked for Susan.
I really sometimes struggle with speculative fiction, but I loved your work and how it pushed me to consider how people deal with death, grief, and tragedy. What do you hope your readers will take away from your book?
Oh, I think when it comes to how grief affects people, it's so individual and everybody's circumstances are so different that I don't want to be prescriptive. I can only sort of talk about how it happened for me. I think that one thing that you hear a lot when you experience a loss is that you shouldn't make big decisions until your equilibrium returns, you know, like you're sort of in this upheaval of emotion and you might be tempted to change your life in some major way. And people will often say, like, you know, hold the phone a little bit. And again, I think that can be really good advice. For me, though, I think that I'm actually kind of sympathetic to the idea that it's not a bad time to change your life. At least in my own experience, losing some good friends, at a fairly young age, kind of pushed me to question what I was doing, I guess, in my career. I was a little bit unhappy in academia, but I'd been doing it for a long time, and I felt like I'd, put all this time and work into it. So I was sort of scared to leave, wasn't really thinking about leaving. And then when I started to have these visceral kind of reminders that we don't have a lot of time, people who I knew who were my age and who were healthy, a year before were suddenly not. And I had been kind of living like I was going to get infinite time and a lot of do-overs. And I started to see like, we don't get that. And so for me, it was actually the right decision to kind of start to question the path I was on because of grief. And it's funny because in the book, Odile does something similar. I think a lot of these kinds of considerations about how grief changes your life and can change your direction in life, those are sort of things I was exploring through the book. But then in the book, Odile sort of makes a mistake, I think, in response to the experience of grief. Or at least a lot of readers think that what she does is a mistake. And I don't know, maybe it's some kind of perversity of mine that I, even though it was a good thing for me to change my life, I decided to have my protagonist make a mistake by doing so.
All right, Scott, we like to give our viewers and followers a chance to ask some of their own questions. Here's one from one of our PBS Books Readers Club Facebook group. Eileen LaFleur O'Hara asks, will there be a sequel? And says, I'd like to see if she initiates changes in the Valley.
It is conceivable. Well, I'm not currently writing it. I'm writing something new. The book has been develop it as a TV series, and Hollywood, a million things have to go right for things to actually go on the air. So this is there's a lot of big ifs here, but I would say that if they make the show and if the first season covers the scope of the book, then the second season would actually pick up and address the question that Eileen is asking.
Interesting. So I know our time together is almost over, but we wanted to just get to know you a little bit better, and just understand your story and how did you get to be where you are now, and how did it feel to see your novel actually come to be? I just think to see your book like there in a bookstore must be pretty amazing.
It is amazing. Yeah, it took me a couple of days actually to dare to go into bookstores and actually look at it for some reason. I was like, I don't want to jinx that it's real and go in there and not see it and be like, oh, I guess this is all fake. I think that, the process of publishing it's so surreal. I think that one of the strangest things about it is just that a book is something that you have absolute control over for so long. While you're writing it, it's a world you've created, people you've created, everything about it is within your control. And the second that it's published, it's completely out of your control. And there's this kind of massive severance that occurs. And I think that your brain still wants to try to maintain control in some way. It's like you've like a phantom limb. It's still, you kind of still feel it, even though you can't, it's not there anymore. And so you end up trying to replace that control you used to have with things that are really maybe not productive, like it leads to Googling yourself too much and social media too much. These are all kind of spurious ways of trying to maintain that control that's really gone. And so the better thing to do is just focus on the next book where you can get that control back.
All right, Scott, we love to end our PBS Books Readers Club conversations with a bit of a lightning round, if you are up for that.
Let's do it.
All right, question one. Did you always know that you were a writer?
Oh, gosh. I mean, yeah, I guess so.
I was always good.
I was there. I had it.
I had a 7th grade teacher who he made us write short stories like once a month. And the first story that I wrote, he sent it back with the comment, send me a signed copy of your first novel. So I guess since the 7th grade, I haven't yet because I'm having a hard time tracking him down, but I think I finally got a lead.
That's so
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah, I love that.
Really cool.
Yeah. It was 7th grade for me too. Anyway, what is your ideal writing setup? Are you a morning person, night owl? Do you like to work in an office, coffee shop? Do you mix that up at all?
I wrote most of this book in the public library. I've never had like a home office, so I just did it in the public library. And I use a program called Cold Turkey, which I'm not even sure if it exists anymore. My laptop is like a decade old. So you used to be able to get a program called Cold Turkey, which just freezes every function on your computer, no internet, no other program. You just have to reach the word limit that you gave yourself. So if you plug in
We're all
1,000
writing
words.
this
Yeah,
down.
I'm like, I need that so hard.
I love that.
Yeah, no, it's great. You can't escape it. You turn your computer off, it comes back on. It's like, no, you're not done yet.
Wow.
So it's about self-binding.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
book, e-reader, or audiobook?
Oh, got to go with book. Paper loyalist. I love what readers do. I find for me that reading is kind of an activity that takes place in time, and I need to be able to kind of, set my own pace and return to sentences that I like. And an audiobook, great in many ways, but it does sort of impose the pace of somebody else. So for me, it's always got to be paper.
Yeah.
All right, favorite book from your childhood?
Got to be several of the Chronicles of Narnia, I guess. I would say.
That.
Yeah, Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, Magician's Nephew, and Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Did you
Good ones.
Oh, they are excellent ones. Did you receive any memorable advice along the way in writing your first novel?
Not so much with the novel because I kept it so secret that I was doing it, so nobody knew to advise me. But I think that I did import some good advice from my dissertation supervisor for my PhD. Ronnie, he told me, so at the start of a dissertation, you're facing this gigantic task and you're, a young grad student, you want to sort of take on everything, and it can be overwhelming and lead to stasis. You just don't know where to start. Mm-hmm. And he said, start with the one thing you can write right now without a whole bunch of research, just the one thing that seems really obvious to you, just do that. And then I did it, and I came back and I said, it's funny, like I thought it was going to be 2 paragraphs long, and instead it was, 20 pages, and then that became 30 pages. And he was kind of looked at me with this twinkle in his eye, and he was like, yeah, that's the point, like once you just kind of, get over your sort of initial nerves about starting, then you can kind of find your way.
That's really good advice. What are your favorite books that you've read in the last year?
I guess fiction, I would say Jenny Erpenbeck's novel Kairos, which I think just got nominated for the International Booker or shortlisted. That's kind of this extreme May-December romance that takes place at sort of the last years of the East German Republic, and the fall of the wall, and then the sort of first years of the reunified capitalist Germany. So that's a really great novel. I think that nonfiction, I read Elizabeth Rush. It's a book called The Quickening, and it's about this expedition to Antarctica and to see sort of the Doomsday Glacier, the Thwaites Glacier that's melting rapidly, while she's also considering whether to bring a child into this world. Now, that's a great book as well.
All right, next question is, what guidance would you give to aspiring writers, or maybe in the theme of The Other Valley, what advice would you give to your younger self about becoming a successful writer?
I love that.
I mean, it's a very well phrased question too, because you can only give advice to sort of another version of yourself. I think, like, I can't advise people who have totally different temperaments and different issues than the ones that I have. The version, like the writers like me, the advice that I think that they maybe would benefit from, that I would have benefited from, was definitely just to write the book that you want to read. It's sort of standard advice, but it's one that really speaks to me, is that you have to kind of ignore the book you think you should write, or the book that you think is maybe marketable, and just write the one that you love, because you're going to spend a lot of time with it. You have to kind of have that energy, that sort of internal drive, rather than just trying to match it up with what someone else's expectations. And I think that, psychologically, the process of writing is always toggling between, being hard on yourself and being compassionate with yourself. And so I would say, like, be compassionate with yourself in the sense that it's okay that everything you're writing right now is bad, and it's just going to get better each time that you go through it until it's finally actually on the good side of the ledger. So yeah, that's the advice I would give. Just, you have time to make it better.
Great advice.
Yeah, really good. Finally, Scott, anything that you'd like to say to your readers?
Oh, just thank you so much. Anybody who, takes the time to read this book, I'm just so appreciative. And also, I guess, support your independent booksellers and your libraries.
I love that.
All right, Scott Alexander Howard, thank you so much for joining us on the PBS Books Readers Club.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Wow, he really did the thing, in the words of Ariana Bezos. I really appreciate his answers and his insight into just how he made this whole world come together. It was really good.
It makes it a lot more fun to read the book and go back and reread a book once you know what the author put into it.
Absolutely.
It just makes it so much more fun to read the book.
Exactly.
Well, if you haven't read it yet, I'm sure The Other Valley is at the top of your reading list. You can pick up a copy at your local library or bookstore. Download the ebook when you support your PBS station.
And remember that as a member of your local station, you'll also get access to PBS Passport, where you can stream more amazing PBS shows. If you loved reading The Other Valley, you might enjoy streaming A Brief History of the Future, a 6-part documentary series about our futures and how we can reimagine them. Hosted by renowned futurist Ari Wallach, the show invites viewers on a journey around the world that is filled with discovery, hope, and possibility about where we find ourselves today and what could come next. Let's take a quick look at A Brief History of the Future.
When you hear the term the future, what does that conjure up?
What we do and the things we create over the next few decades will shape all minds going forward for the rest of time.
I set out in search of people who are building better futures.
Civilization is precious. Life is precious.
Hundreds of years from now, they're going to look back on our generation as the most pivotal in human history.
A Brief History of the Future, other documentaries, and full seasons of your favorite shows are available to stream on PBS Passport. Just $5 a month makes you a member of your local PBS station, giving you access to all the amazing shows in Passport, including the extended edition of this interview with Scott Alexander Howard.
And your PBS Book stickers, don't forget that. And get your ebook download of The Other Valley or any of our featured reads. Just visit pbsbooks.org/donate and you'll be taken right to your local PBS station's giving page. After you complete your donation, you'll get an email from your station with a special code to download your ebook.
Every station's donation page is just a little different, so you may need to search a little bit to find the PBS Books gifts. But stick with us because your support makes this Readers Club possible.
If you're not in a position to donate, you can still help by sharing this video and leaving us a comment, like, or love. Now we're going to do something a little bit special for our next book reveal. If you want to be among the first to know our next pick, you need to join the PBS Books Readers Club Facebook group. Just search for PBS Books Readers Club on Facebook and request to join the group. As a special thank you to our book clubbers, we're going to share a first look at our next pick in the group on May 1st before sharing it out on social media.
We'll also have more book recommendations, fun articles, and exclusive author interviews in the PBS Books e-newsletter. So it's a great one to brighten up your inbox.
We're so glad to have you as part of the PBS Books Readers Club. If you love this conversation, please consider making a donation to your local PBS station so we can keep our book club going. Click the link in the description or visit pbsbooks.org/donate.
Remember, you can get your removable PBS Book stickers for your laptop, phone, or whatever you'd like to show off your love for books and for PBS. And you can also get an ebook download of The Other Valley or any of our PBS Books features.
And everyone can help by sharing this video with all your friends, letting us know your thoughts in the comments, and giving it a like or a love in whatever generation you do this symbol with. Thanks for reading along with the PBS Books Readers Club.
Oh, that was so great.
I think I do it like this.